Hi, this is Jo Wright, and today I'm talking to the wonderful Marcus Saxton, who we're going to talk about authentic leadership. Marcus is the CEO of Totally Wicked, and he epitomises authentic leadership. So Marcus, today, thank you for joining me, and I would love you to share with us your insights, your journey as a true authentic leader. So tell us a bit more about yourself, Marcus.
Hi, Jo. Great to join you and your listeners. As I've said previously, I can barely remember last week, so I'll do my best at sort of rolling back in history to bring to life sort of the journey that I've been on and then up to present day. So I think it is relevant to sort of go right back. And when I began, I was a sort of average achiever, I'd say, at school. So was a real passion for sport, and the Rounders back came out. And that was when my excitement peaked, I'd say, in lessons most of the time. Found myself going through school and deciding to go to university, had a real passion for sport and exercise, and went into what was pretty unique at the time, and everyone thought it was about running around a sports field, sport and exercise science, BSc. So I moved away from home, had a thoroughly enjoyable time, and found out it wasn't about running around the field, and it was about why does the biomechanics of a sort of golf ball or the body act in the way it does, which was slightly disappointing, but I had a thoroughly enjoyable time. Came out of university, and I wasn't really purpose behind what is it I should go into at that point, other than I had this passion for sport and exercise, and found myself in David Lloyd Leisure that had just been purchased actually by Whitbread, so a big organisation. We're rolling out many sites across the country. And there I was, I found myself at sort of ripe old age of about 20, attempting to, the words I've now used, lead a team, probably more manage or just at best sort of direct them at the time. From anyone from hairy-arsed chefs, whether male or female, that isn't a prerequisite, by the way, of employment at David Lloyd. It was just what I found myself in. And ultimately, having no technical experience in food and beverage, staggeringly, someone sort of saw something and decided it was a good idea to put me in charge of that area, which was, again, quite surprising at the time. But in hindsight, it might be a theme that we'll talk about. Curiosity, putting yourself into environments and situations that stretch your thinking and put a degree of uncomfort into how do I lead a group when I don't have the technical experience. So, and that's a sort of theme that led throughout many of the roles that we might come on to. So had a great time at David Lloyd, but after a couple of years, I was in work when everyone else was enjoying themselves. And I opened a magazine that I now know very well called The Grocer. At the time, I didn't know it well, and saw an advert for Mars and thought, company car, and this sounds like quite an interesting role and salary, and for an organisation called Mars that I vaguely had an association with, clearly Mars bars, but I did know that they were a pretty good employer, or at least I thought they were, and that absolutely proved to be the case. So I went to work for them for around 3 years and sort of cut my teeth, I'd say, on a field repping role like we all did, calling into places and sort of trying to sell the woes and build relationships with customers to ultimately try and purchase more of your product. I'm going to sort of very quickly, Jo, go through the next part of the career, and someone can find me as an avid LinkedIn user if they want to know more, but worked and had the real privilege, I'd say, to work for many great names and organizations that given me a real breadth of experience, whether it's Budweiser in beer, going off to Britvic, which is where we met. So a real category leader, which was one of the key points I went to them at the time, had a truer experience of what line management and leadership was, then got enticed by GlaxoSmithKline into Lucozade and Ribena, had an amazing time, stepped into marketing. What did I know about marketing? And again, that was part of my journey of leadership around leading a team that had much more technical experience, albeit I came with hopefully the right behavioural credentials. And then needed to make my way back up north for personal family reasons, back into beer at Molson Coors, and ultimately, more latterly, spent 7-8 years at PZ Cussons, leading their UK, Germany, and some of Western Europe. And then, as you say, here I find myself in Totally Wicked, which is the bit that I'm really passionate about, not least because it's the business I'm with now, but because it, I think, hopefully brings together all of that experience into something that your listeners might find interesting. And that's a few fold. So if I just give you a few headlines and then you can poke around as you feel free, which is, it's a smaller organisation, first thing. Many people will be saying, Totally Wicked who? What's all that about? They might see our logo and think, oh, crikey, what's that? We operate in a really purposeful sector. I'll come back to that because at the time when I got the phone call around a business, I had no idea what vaping was. And quite frankly, like many of your listeners, I sort of said, oh, vaping, is that's the unsavory habit that people have that's linked to cigarettes? And actually it's not. It's a really purposeful category to work in an organization where I can safely say we are empowering smokers to transform their lives genuinely to a safer alternative, with me at the helm to some degree, with the rest of a great team of 360 people, to impact people's lives so positively. I've never been able to be quite so close to the action and have a genuinely authentic purpose. Lots of those other organizations, as much as I genuinely loved them, actually had a post-rationalized purpose. Crikey, we sell soft drinks, right? It's about helping young people to be refreshed. And it just didn't feel, whilst at the time I loved it, now being somewhere where we were founded to help smokers and still exist today, actually puts a very different lens on things. So that's who we are at Totally Wicked.
Wow. I mean, you just, now you can take a breath. I mean, you have just crammed in, what, 25 years career, more into
steady, Joe, steady. There are lines, but they're not that bad yet.
Not 25. It's something like that for sure, because you have done so much and you've kind of risen through the ranks because of your leadership skills. You've risen and gone bigger and broader, and now I can totally see from the organisations you've worked for, very much predominantly in the FMCG sector, and that's where you and I met. But actually, and all those learnings along the way will have been phenomenal. But now being able to lead something, like you're saying, very purposeful, with true meaning, I think feels like, wow, it's all come together in terms of all the learnings you'll have had along the way, coming together now in this role, I think is absolute testament to you as an individual, as a leader. And what I know of you, Marcus, and I know you very well in terms of your authenticity, but also inspirational in terms of how you bring people along the journey, whether that's your colleagues, whether that's people who report to you, whether that's stakeholders, whether that's the external community. You know, you do a lot of lobbying, and kind of you put out some great messages there to really help people along in their lives. That feels like you to me, and you're down to earth as well. But there's me putting words in your mouth. You tell me what authentic leadership means to you, because that's why we're speaking today. You know, what makes Marcus an authentic leader?
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I think it is, and after all these years and having made, I'm sure, many errors along the journey, albeit you described the positive sides of it, I think it is about being yourself. And I know we'll come back to that. It sounds cliched, and we'll come on to, I think, how do you be yourself? How do you have the confidence? How do you have the experience to say, well, sometimes you've got to stand on either stage or with one-to-one with someone, and I've got to have to deliver difficult messages historically. And I think over the years, I would have, looking back in hindsight, delivered them in different ways to how I have delivered them now. And hopefully more latterly, I've got better at it, because it is about understanding. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions, as I say, on the basis of a business or for the greater good of the business. And it's not always easy, but historically, I might have come out in those bigger organizations with a sort of what maybe describes as a corporate mantra, or I'd seen the buzzwords or seen the paragraph that had been really fastidiously written by HR, because we all needed to align the same message. And the danger with those things, as important as they are, is it does take away your ability to empathize, your ability to put a real world example, to hopefully still deliver those key messages, but in a way that makes people understand the context, make people be treated as individuals. And I do think that's part of it. It's being yourself. It's doing it with honesty and integrity. It's demonstrating and harnessing and, I suppose, realizing the potential in others to share those values that either you or the organization, and hopefully those things come together.
So how do you be yourself then? Because I totally recognize that. I recognize the value that, you know, in all the people I speak to, the things that come out as they've grown throughout their career are actually taking off some of those corporate masks and actually bringing themselves to work. Whoever, you know, I had a great conversation recently with a lady about bringing your full self to work. And she said, well, that's your choice. It's about how much you want to bring. Because I said, I've experienced people in my career who, you know, turn up at the office door and then put on a mask, and then they're a different person, then off they go again. I was like, that feels like a lot of energy, when actually just bring yourself to work and kind of harness the best of you. You know, in terms of bringing yourself to work, how can you bring your true self? What does that actually look like in real life? I know you talk about empathy, you talk about having those honest conversations with integrity, but how can you bring you? What does that really mean? What does bringing Marcus to work and leading your 300 to 400 people strong organization on a really purposeful journey? What does it look like in reality?
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, is it easier for me now that I'm sort of more senior and sort of semi got the helm of an organization, because I can align my values more closely to those decisions that we're driving through the organization? And I think that probably helps, because what I mean conversely is, when you're not got the ability to influence the decisions in an organization, I've been in many of them where I was close to, but not that close to God. And therefore in that, it was other people's decisions that I might have been able to influence, but ultimately it was someone else's decisions. So that may certainly help, because I do think that helps with bringing your true self. How can I deliver a message, whether it's wonderfully positive or negative and tough, whether that's restructuring or whatever it may be around a business decision, if I'm not fully aligned to it? Because that's where I think you feel compromised. So I think that's something that's probably a little bit easier for me, but others need to understand. How do they get as comfortable? How do they become curious? How do they ask the right questions such that they can take those messages, if they're not in a privileged position to ultimately make the decisions, such that when they do deliver them, they can ultimately deliver them with that depth of understanding that brings their own authenticity through it, if you know what I mean.
So that feels like that does feel back to alignment of values there. That feels like joining an organization that the organizational values are aligned somewhere to your own, because there's not many people who are going to be CEO of an organization and can absolutely be, at the helm of the organization to make those decisions. So, a lot of our listeners will be listening because they're leading a team, but they're within a large organization. They might be leading a team, but they're in a small organization. But it feels like, then, if I'm interpreting this right, Marcus, that you're talking values, like actually, how can you embrace the organizational purpose and values, but then be yourself in how you execute on those.
Demonstrate them and ultimately execute it. Exactly. And just, it sort of digresses slightly from that point, but it is to your other point around, I think, the conversation you said you have with the lady, how much do you bring into work with yourself? I remember really pertinently, it was when I was at GSK, actually, the journey I was on, a leader at that point, was I was still a robot. Now, I thought a leader meant drive out massive amounts of output, sort of tenacious, resilient, literally sort of nothing could hit me and impact me. And I thought that strong persona of a leader was what leadership meant. And I remember really clearly going into my then director's office at the time. She said, Marcus, your numbers are amazing. Your team's, doing really, really well. But actually, they don't know who you are, and we don't know who you are. And I sort of looked at them as literally like, sorry, I don't understand what you mean.
Yeah.
Look at the results. It's fantastic. He said, yeah, but they're just going to learn from you, lean into you, galvanize behind you. I will, the rest of the organization will, if we can just see a bit more of who Marcus is. And it took me a little bit of a while. And that's where I really got curious with, what is this leadership? So to the point that your colleague made and said, well, it depends how much you want to turn up with. I agree. You have to ultimately make that call. But never underestimate, to my little story, to what degree it's about others and the lens that they need to see that authentic, who are you, that should bias more so how much you're prepared to give. Because if you're only coming in with your lens of, well, I only want to give this amount, regrettably, that might not be enough to make this up the 8 people that are in your 9-person team. And for me, it's more about externalizing and saying, well, if 8 of those people need me to share more about what I did at the weekend, what I'm doing tonight, who am I as a person, family, friends, etc., then for me, that's the most important lens that I need to look at it through.
Lovely. I love that. And it's really interesting, because the more conversations I have with, similar people to yourself in terms of either leading large teams, organizations, that real person, and I use the whole person, because that's who you are outside of work, and bring you some of that into work, all of it, some of it, however much you want to. I think that is where, and all the research, all the books are saying, be yourself, because it's damn hard work to actually be somebody else. That's, and I think the lessons you've just described are fabulous, because that you've described what a lot of people go through, what some people will be going through now, in terms of how am I supposed to lead? How am I supposed to be with this team of people who I've just now got looking at me for some sort of guidance? One of the things that we read a lot about is vulnerability. And we write a lot about it in Coaching Culture magazine. And that can mean an interesting, I got described recently as strong yet vulnerable. And I was like, oh, I don't know what. And I thought that probably is true, actually, strong yet vulnerable. What does that mean? Because I get it in my head, what it means to me. But what would that mean to you as a CEO of an organisation, vulnerability?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on this one. So instant reaction is sort of, I agree, not that it matters well Marcus Saxton agrees or not, but you know what I mean? The question is directed at me. So I agree, vulnerability, and immediately what springs to mind for me is demonstrating to others that you don't have all the answers. And when we'll come on to what's gone on in the last 18 months, I mean, this is well documented. Lots of leaders actually have either proved their true worth or not in the last 18 months, because when faced with that ability to say, well, crikey, you find me a textbook where it said there was a pandemic that was going to happen and this was going to all go on. There was nothing you could have read. No. The ability to therefore think very quickly, right, I'm vulnerable. Dear everyone, I don't have the answers to this situation right now, but stay with us. We're going to seek, we're going to explore, we're going to do whatever we need to do in our organization to get to where we need to get to, whether that's survival, whether that's exploiting the growth or whatever it may be. I think that really came into its own. So there's a very real situation where, for me, vulnerability and having the confidence to be able to stand up on a stage or do some sort of communication. And I remember quite vividly, we suddenly did lots more communication. And I remember my first video was, listen, everyone, I'm just here to say, this is what we're going through and this is what we're thinking. I can't tell you where we're going to go and what we're going to do right now. But just rest reassured, we are looking after the company's best interests and yours. Brilliant. And we'll be coming back to you as soon as we can. Super. So I suppose for that perspective, the ability to very genuinely, and I'll come back to that in a second, demonstrate vulnerability is, I think, important. And people can recognize back to is this guy stealth and a robot? No, he's not. He's just like us. And I can approach him and describe to him some of these difficulties I'm having, and hopefully we can work through them. The bit is genuine, though, for me, because in a broader context, the bit I find challenging over the last 12, 18 months beyond, not linked to COVID, by the way, is this sort of virtuous requirement to demonstrate vulnerability. So, oh, crikey, I don't feel good today. Now, if you genuinely don't feel good, please, absolutely, that will help people. But almost it attracts like bees to sort of honey, people thinking, to be seen as a good person, to get greater shares, likes and coverage and people closer to me, I need to show vulnerability in an unauthentic fashion. And I think ultimately people see through that, but I do think there's quite a lot of it sort of vulnerable washing, let's call it.
Vulnerable washing.
Could go on where people have read it, that they need to be vulnerable and therefore demonstrate it in an inauthentic fashion. And therefore that's where I think it goes wrong.
That's really interesting, actually. That is really interesting, because I think you could be right that people kind of go, oh, crikey, I need to show this because I've read it somewhere, or not. Some people going, I absolutely won't show this. But that's interesting. So it feels like vulnerability for you is also closely aligned with humility in terms of, being true, being genuine, being authentic, being real. And admitting when you just don't have the answers, and that's okay. Whereas if you think about, maybe throughout both of our careers, we've had leaders who, they've been seen to want to have all the answers to everything, and actually that's not normal. It's not.
Exactly.
We're here to be curious, and we're here to continue learning and show people we're still learning on this journey as well.
Yeah, agreed. And ultimately, I mean, something that sort of relates to this isn't quite obvious at first is I almost consider myself more latterly the most effective I've been is where I've almost been a really effective facilitator or conductor, whatever the analogy is that you like best, whereby, to your point, it's not about vulnerability in this context, but it's about when there's big decisions to be made in an organization or smaller tactical ones. To your point, it's very easy, and historically, I would have been really comfortable saying, the answer's this. I've seen it before. That's what we need to do. It feels strong and everyone, yes, Marcus, that's the right direction. And off we all go. And we're all very happy with red behavior like that. Yeah, so what I consider myself to be at my best, Jo, in some analogy would be either a conductor or a facilitator. And this does link to vulnerability in a manner anyway, which is historically I would have been at my most effective, I would have thought, and others may have done, when it's that there's an issue, there's a question, and the leader is seen to step forward with the obvious answer because they've seen it in the past, or let me give you the experience, it's bang, it's this direction. Everyone feels confident to some degree that there's a decision been made, and it can feel quite liberating. But more latterly, what it's about for me is one, forming the right team, but more importantly, it's a form of vulnerability, which is demonstrating that to others, I don't have the answer. Yep. But most importantly, even if I did have the answer, let's make sure that we've canvassed the views of others around the table that hopefully come with more diverse views than I've got and ultimately lead to a better decision to be made. So it's that ability to sort of, hence I'm saying, conduct or facilitate others to get to a desirable outcome on the basis of more of that leadership experience than I've now got, that historically I may have just defaulted to the answer's A, let's go in that direction.
This feels strangely like building a coaching culture, Marcus, because that's it, isn't it? It's about recognising you haven't got all the answers, but not only that, you might have your views and your thoughts, but actually empowering others to work with, collaborate, unlock their potential, get there. Because I'm sure your team are a brilliant team of people who bring way more experience than one person. So actually it's about harnessing that. Definitely, that's a coaching style of leadership, whether you like it or not. That's the badge I'm going to give you, because that's what you're doing. You're authentic and empowering others, bringing their best self to work, but you allowing that and unlocking that and coming to better decisions on the back of that. That for me is absolutely, from all the work we do, all the research we do, that's the style of leadership that is most successful, most successful in so many ways. And we often talk about, because that also builds trust. Because you're building trust by asking, you're respecting people's opinions over your own and building that trust and honesty. And we always say that, building a culture of trust then unlocks the performance, as opposed to driving the performance, which you described earlier in your GSK days, where you were great numbers, but the team didn't really know you. Well, once they get to know you more and you unlock you to share who you are, builds so much more. So the GSK felt like a great learning and you got the numbers, but actually that would have potentially been more of a short-term success, whereas what you're doing now is longer term.
Yeah, agreed. And it's also, though, back to this, without trying to get sort of buzzword bingo in on authentic, it's back to this doing it, which might come from experience, but doing it authentically to that bit, Jo. Because I remember historically, I'd done the Insights colour profile. I'd sort of moved on from recognising that just recruiting everyone like me probably wasn't as fun as it was going to be, wasn't ultimately that effective. But actually, I'd moved on from that stage. But I didn't fully recognize and embrace the benefit of what you're describing. So I did it because I almost, yes, you're yellow, I'm red, you're green, you're going to come with a different lens, and sort of through gritted teeth almost listen to them and ask the question. But now for me, it is, again, through that maturity, through that experience and arguably confidence and with a bit of understanding of vulnerability, says, no, I recognize now the power of embracing it and finding and seeking people in my team and organization that will definitely have a different perspective. Because originally, as I say, that would have been, what do you think to this? And then it's like, I hear the answer and think, that's really interesting, goodbye, and sort of go off and do something different anyway. Whereas now it's actually generating better outcomes by embracing it and bringing that on board.
So it feels like your learnings have been through experience. You've not sat there and kind of just gone, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do, off I go and do it. It feels like your experiences along the way have been hugely valuable, rich, and you've learned how to do things differently and therefore done things, you've grown on your leadership journey as you would expect to, but you've learned the error of some of your ways to actually now really have harnessed your potential, I guess, Marcus.
I think so. And to give sort of your listeners some hope, they're saying, well, that's great because you're now there as opposed to I'm not. So how do I do that? Is I wasn't and still am an avid reader of business books. I just find, without being cliched, Google an amazing thing. Clearly, it's a disaster depending on if you've got an ailment you want to look up for. But actually, so far as learning and development, I just find it such a rich tool. At the sort of click of a button, historically, I'm going back many years now, I said at GSK, I got really curious on what on earth is this leadership stuff? Yeah. And the ability to therefore read lots of stimulus and then effectively, to then your point, try and deploy some of those, because that's where I got it from. I didn't just sort of, oh, crikey, I'll try that. Yeah. It was I'd read about some theory and applied it and loads of great business books, then tried to apply it, layer on top sort of observing other leaders around me, great courses that I had the privilege of going on, put that all into the melting pot, to your point, test and try and correct as I see necessary. But it's all those elements. So if anyone sat there thinking, does that mean bin the business book? No, for me, they are a great source of learning material. You've just then got to decide what's the right way for you to deploy it in an authentic fashion in the situation in which you're in.
So continuous learning, then growth mindset stuff, absolutely. I interviewed somebody last week about being more human at work, and one of those things was continue to learn and again keep learning, and that can just make such a difference. So you are saying Google and business books, did you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you can get. And I'll come on to a story, because I had this every time over the last few years where I saw an article. I probably wasn't savvy enough, and someone will tell me I could save it down digitally, but I just printed off a hard copy and just kept it in a file. And when I was just looking at some stimulus the other day, I saw a few of the articles historically, and yeah, it's just, for me, it's picking those up, saving them. You put them in a drawer. You might dig them out every so often and sort of read through them. And it might give you some, for me, it's not, I use the word, not to be pedantic, for me, it's about curiosity. Yeah. I think curiosity is, for me, served me incredibly well, whether I knew it at the time or more recently, I have absolutely realized the benefit of me being curious. One was the phone call that came into me from many jobs I've had the privilege to do. Lots of people would say, no, don't want to speak to that recruiter. They're a pain in the backside. Yeah. For me, why would I not talk to that person or someone else if they were trying to sell me something for 2 minutes, that I can then decide whether on the basis of that curiosity, this may lead to something or not. And it's the same for just demonstrate curiosity, have an interest in people, have an interest in business, have an interest in whatever else it is that motivates you in your personal life, but just have a broad interest. And I'll tell you a little story about Lucky for a minute, because it does have relevance. And this is one of the articles when I was flicking through, I saw. So linked to this about curiosity, it was an article and a scientist many, many years ago, can't remember his name, I think Robert Wiseman, maybe he was called, did a study to say, is there such a thing as lucky people versus unlucky? Because we all can relate to this, whether it be personally us or our friends, whether you are so lucky, you always land on your feet. Well, the summary, and I'll save people the many pages I read, was he did a study that he took 400 people, half of which had named themselves unlucky, half of which had named themselves lucky, put them into a study. And that study was, he gave them a newspaper with 40 pages in, and he asked them and timed them to say how many photos are in this newspaper. On page 2 of the newspaper, it said, tell the facilitator the answer is 43. And then for a laugh, halfway through, we put another one that said, tell the facilitator to end now, the answer is 43 and you'll win $250.
Ooh.
On average, the people that had named themselves unlucky took 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Those that had named themselves as lucky took seconds to get to the answer. The moral of the story is there is no such thing as lucky or unlucky. What it is about curiosity and openness. Those that are much more curious, open to stimulation, situation, conversation, you name it in personal life. I need a boyfriend, right? I need him with dark hair, size 8 feet, size 36 legs. You're not going to be pretty lucky. Go out there and say, I'm just going to go out with friends tonight, and you have a conversation with someone and suddenly you find yourself in the relationship of your dreams. So the point being, back to this, it's curiosity, I think, that can serve leaders, managers, anyone really well, because ultimately that creates opportunities.
Absolutely. And this, I mean, obviously Carol Dweck would call it growth mindset, wouldn't she? Keep everything open to learn more. Curiosity, I love that. I got challenged recently for asking too many questions, but I see it as being curious, and to the point of, I'm not sure I know how to have a conversation if I'm not curious into understanding how, what's going on in somebody's world, blah, 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 blah. I got told from somebody who had a very fixed mindset that's too curious. But no, I think this sounds great, and I love the Lucky Unlucky story. And so if you were picking out, I don't know, let's think 3 things. Why not thinking threes? If there was 3 things that you could sort of go, you know what, this is what's made my career, this is what's made me who I am today in terms of the successful, authentic leader that you are, what would you've touched on a lot of things already, but if there was just a summary of 3, what would you share with others? Curious is definitely one. So I have found myself having conversations with people and or opportunities in business to either change jobs or within business that has opened up greater potential for sure through that. Drive. When you go through all the behaviors and all the things, and I don't think you can categorize one or another, but I often do and think it's that classic, if there's one thing that someone could come to the organization with, what would it be? And it's come with the right behavior and we'll teach you the skill and all that good stuff. Drive, I struggle to argue with. If someone turns up with the right drive, I think that actually paves the way for success in some way. Yes, you've got to apply it in the right direction. Yes, you've got to have ideally the right learning opportunities. That sort of good stuff. But I think as a behavior, if you are driven, I think you can therefore apply that with the help of others into the right direction. And passion, I suppose, is not least running around kissing people. That's not what I mean. But I mean passion for what you do. Despite what I said about working for Totally Wicked, that I truly believe in, we are really purposeful, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to lead an organisation that has such purpose. I have had a passion for any role stroke organisation I've been in. And as people say, if you're not sort of happy in work, you spend a lot of time there. So find something else. I know that's easy for me to say, but genuinely, I have thrown myself into and had a passion for the products we sold, the business I've worked within, the people I've worked with. So for me, I think it's about those 3 things. It's about curiosity, it's about drive, and it's about passion. And where do you think it's going then? Let's wind forward when we're older. Another 10 years, say, where do you think it's going for the future of organisations? Because we've definitely experienced a change in our careers from kind of when we first met all them years ago to kind of where we are now to kind of what's next. What are you seeing, hearing, feeling that, is going to be the future?
So I suppose something that's consistent is the ability to create a powerful culture. I suppose in general, that's your coaching culture, whether it's coaching per se or just the ability to create a culture that offers everyone in a business the opportunity to understand the organisation through that culture, to have a voice, and to develop and deliver against the shared purpose, I think is really important. So I think that's the consistent. I think more broadly, if you say, what are some of those trends and influences that are going to shape organisations a little bit? Probably the digital one you can't get away from. So yes, last 18 months, all the headline of 5 years into sort of 6 months or whatever it is. I think digital is clearly always was here to stay and has been accelerated. So it's been an amazing learning for me. Previous organizations, I could have had a working knowledge, and we're always desperate to get more business away from the grocers to balance it digitally. Now I'm in an organization where we've got 40-50% of our revenue through digital. So it was an amazing opportunity for me to learn. And I think more and more of that curiosity in that space is going to be important. Sustainability, purpose, responsible business. It's always been around. But I think, again, back to GSK, we did a strategy day 15 years ago that started to say, what if they bought sugar tax? What if? At the time, we thought we were all absolutely bonkers. And now you look at the sort of influence that's coming in and the regulation, and it's absolutely not bonkers. So I think that's going to be here to stay for sure. Risk-taking, I think more as a behavior. I think the ability to take risks, and everyone will say calculated, and again, to what degree they're calculated or not. I think risk-taking in general for people in business can have real positive, not to the point of hopefully causing the demise of a business. But yeah, having people that have a growth mindset, that have the ability and desire to want to take appropriate risks and give opportunities to other leaders that others wouldn't, I think is really important. And pace. I think the world is changing so quickly. We've seen it in the delivery world. What you used to be able to get the next day then became an hour. We signed up to someone that was doing an hour delivery, and within a month it's now 10 minutes. So pace and the ability for people to act with pace. Think about your organization, how you hire people, the structures you put in place, the processes you have in place that enable people to act at pace to deliver sooner and sooner for the consumer, I think is even more important as well.
Thanks, Marcus. And is there anything else you would want to share with people today? Because you've covered off so much. I mean, in that short space of time, in terms of, your journey as a leader, which I think is remarkable and fascinating and full of rich learnings for sure. And in terms of how you personally have, I suppose, learned and tried new things to then develop yourself, to then actually see how you've enabled others and how therefore you've been able to lead in that way, and how you've been at your most effective through that being a conductor. That's definitely come out loud and clear. And obviously you've said the word curious a lot, and that ability to continue learning has just come out loud and clear. Is there anything else you would love to share with people? Because today's obviously all about, developing yourselves as authentic leaders and the importance of that in a culture. Anything else you would want to share? Top tips, tricks, anything at all? You've covered a lot.
I can't juggle, so I'll avoid the tricks, even though it's that time of year. But the only thing I'd say, and end on a bit of controversy maybe, or at least it will leave some thought-provoking areas for people, is back to this sort of virtuous what's out there at the moment and going around in the world, which is a little bit of work is bad, sort of personal life is good. And what I mean by that is that, this mantra of you only spend sort of 8 hours in the office and then get out and enjoy yourself. I have had, yes, a very privileged career, but I hope it's in part because of what I've put into business. I have met so many friends. I have so many great acquaintances, business opportunities. I've seen the world, traveled the world because of work. For me, it's just that balance of enjoy it, go back to that, find the business where you can feel most aligned to the values that organization shares and wants to deliver on, and bloody embrace it. Put the hours in if that's what you feel you want to do. Yes, it's more about output than input, but don't let those people that are trying to sort of curb the benefit of work to win, because I think there's such opportunities if you can get those things to align that can really liberate many things in your own personal life through work itself.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of loving what you do and enjoying your work, and like you said, the contacts you can make, the conversations you can have, the development of you as a human being is phenomenal. And a lot of that comes through work, isn't it? For sure. Now, I must admit, we definitely talk about, the number of hours worked is no longer a badge of honour. Yeah. But that's more the burnout territory. The kind of old Wolf of Wall Street sort of world. But actually, there's definitely people talk work, they talk life, and they talk balance. But I think it's all life. It's all life. So enjoy it, because that's what it's there for. And work can, we do spend over a third of our life, or whatever the number is, at work. It is enjoy it, isn't it? And get the most out of it.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Very good.
Thank you, Marcus. Really enjoyed our conversation today. And I'm sure, a lot of people get a lot from what you've said, and they'll take, what they need to out of this conversation, and how your journey, can inspire them to continue, learning and growing, because you've definitely shared so much. So thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Not at all. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Marcus. And thank you all for listening in. We've got another great podcast here with Marcus, but if you do want to listen into some more podcasts with Coaching Culture, please do, because we've got some great guests lined up. Thank you.